Customer service. Let's take a look at the vehicle. We always talk about the vehicle. The vehicle is probably the beginning and the end of how most people see the system. It's very, very important. We have a lot of sponsors here, VPG, Ford, and many regulators now are really spending time looking at the vehicle for the first time. And standing up, like in New York City, we have the Taxi Tomorrow RFP that I issued before I went, and David is got some big tough decisions to make on where that goes. But we need a purpose-built cab. All of us would benefit from that. Whether the vehicle has leg room, whether it's clean, the age of the vehicle, whether it's clean air or accessible, that's something that's very important to folks these days. These are things that all contribute to the system being better. Payment, very, very important. Ease of payment, credit and debit cards, tipping. Reasonable and understandable rates of fare. I'm not going to point fingers at anybody, but there are some rates of fare that are very confusing. If the regulator can clarify that, that's good for the customer, it's good for business, it's good for the overall strength of the system. Payment security, overcharging safeguards, making sure that drivers are not ripping people off, confidence in the system. To the extent that erodes confidence, passengers leave and they flee to other modes potentially. Driver standards. Passenger complaint systems and good enforcement, very, very key. Let's talk about in New York City, we have a prohibition on street hails, the only city that has that. The constant thing you hear from lenders in the industry is you need to go after the illegals. And I'm sure all of you have heard this in your jurisdictions. It's a constant battle, an ongoing battle that we all have. And you know what? That has an impact upon the Medallion. If you're going to pay for a permit and plump all this money down for it, and you got some character who's across the street picking people up and soliciting it without a license, it's a factor. It is a big, big factor. So how many resources are being devoted to that in each jurisdiction? And also driver training and courtesy, and we're going to explore a lot of that in Toronto, but that's important too. Another key ingredient is economic health, the economic health of the industry. Passengers, sufficient demand, affordable fares, and stable ridership. It's all about the money. That's one big thing that we'll be hearing about. It's probably a big factor, I'm sure, for the lenders. Drivers, they would want lower lease caps, of course, and higher fares. That's where they're coming from. A living wage, potentially, which is higher than the minimum wage in most cities. Low costs. Drivers, want gas to be down. They want credit card fees to be eliminated. They want, license fees and fines to go away. Well, welcome to the real world. Owners, sufficient labor supply, a driver pool, very, very important. The only time the price that I can remember in New York City dipped was when we had a driver shortage that was reversed, and a trend that we reversed because we finally gave a very hefty fare increase to them, which has kept people in the industry. And when I left, we had a record number of drivers all time. But that's important because if you don't have the driver pool, the cabs don't go out on the road, the cash flow is affected, lenders get antsy, and before you know it, they're asking you for a fare increase, they're asking for some type of relief, or like we had in New York City for a period of time when we had the driver shortage, we had a series of foreclosures. And that's not good for a system, that's not good for a permitting system or for the industry. Owners want a reasonable return on their investment, a higher lease cap and rates of fare, that's usually where they're coming from. And reduce costs. I'm sure owners will be happy if gas costs go down, fleet maintenance costs and labor costs go down as well. It's going to be interesting to see how the healthcare bill also impacts this in years to come. Because we always talk about independent contractors, and TLPA knows this as well. Some of these fleet owners and businesses have employees full-time, doing dispatch and all sorts of other things, and all of you are going to be dealing with this. There's going to be some real crazy stuff going on when that health care bill becomes law and they start passing these regs, and whether you agree with it or you don't, it is going to have a real impact on businesses, and you're going to be hearing about it, I'm sure, as regulators. Lenders want and like market stability. They don't like crazy commissioners doing crazy things. They like things that are calm. They like people that listen to them, that are reasonable, that have meetings with them, which I encourage you to do. I had an open door. I know many of you have an open door. So when you have a lender knocking, I think it's a good idea to take their call and to meet with them. Steady cash flow for owners and drivers. It's all about the cash flow. That's what happens now. You have a recession going on. People can't make payments on their homes, the subprime mortgage crisis. Now, and the banks are in an unenviable position because judges don't like moving foreclosure cases. They're not moving through the system. So banks are kind of stuck in a hard place. We want the banking system to improve and to address people's needs, but the banks have no relief. People are just not paying their bills, and they're refusing to make payments on their mortgages in the real estate industry, for example, simply because they want to get leverage so they can get a loan workout and get a better deal. Right or wrong, it's happening, it's a reality, and courts are overwhelmed as it is, and there are foreclosures that are going through that are just sitting there. Okay, and maybe it's a conscious decision by judges, I don't know. They don't want to deal with it, they're hoping the parties work it out. But the banks are in a tough spot, and we got to give them a little bit of, they've been getting a really bad rap, I think. We need to realize that they make our economy work, and thankfully we don't have this problem in the medallion industry. We want to make sure it stays that way. Is that it? Okay, good. Well, I finished that. That is a first. Did I finish on time? That's never happened before. It's thanks to Norma and her staff. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to go to session. Any questions? Yes.
A couple questions. You mentioned that higher medallion prices are correlated with credit cards, accepting credit cards. Is there a causal relationship, or is one causing the other, or are they both caused by something else?
Well, we just tried to identify trends with the survey. I think what we want to do is get to the bottom of that answer. To the extent that I can give you my opinion on it, I would say that where credit cards make the system better and make it easier for passengers, like in New York City, it has increased ridership, and in New York City, it has led to more tips and a higher credit card usage. And the reason that happened is because the vendors put on the screen, 15% tip, 20% tip, 25% tip, and you hit the button and it calculates it. So it's not an issue of just people having cash on hand, and depending on the denomination that you have, it may or may not contribute to the amount of tip. Tips are up. As much opposition as I had in New York City from the industry with the protests and having to leave this conference early because of an alleged attempted strike that they had. Many other cities have this problem, but the reality is that the system works well and people are using it. It stimulates revenue and stimulates cash flow, which is good for lenders, and I can't imagine it's not something that's favorably viewed by the medallion industry, the medallion lenders, and we'll hear from them and get their viewpoint on it as well. But that's what I meant by it. That's where I think the correlation is. Anything that makes the system better, I think, is fair game.
Yeah, one other one. You said there doesn't appear to be a correlation between the number of medallions and value. And I'm wondering what explanation you have for that.
Well, that's a complicated answer that will be to that question, but I hope the day will really kind of flush that out. I mean, there are different arguments about it, and I think we want to hear the perspectives of everyone. Okay, one or two more questions, because then we have to move on. Tariq?
It's interesting to see that although this is definitely a taxi system, I keep kind of pushing the subject for hire or the prearranged. Mm-hmm. Is there a trend also to limit and additionally control the number of licensed for hire vehicles or prearranged vehicles, and it's happening in New York or in other cities also?
Well, it depends how you define prearranged. I mean, most cities have a system, Tariq, that are different from New York. New York is unique. Historically, it happened that it got split up, but I mean, there's the systems that have closed systems. They take radio calls and they take street hails. We could talk about it. I don't know if you guys want to have a closed system. Is that what's going on? No. Is that what you want? Absolutely not. No? Oh, okay. Just clarifying. Okay. Any other questions?